There's the one park, and I apologize, I don't remember the name of the one on the left. You already have infrastructure going through there, so your chances of keeping it out of there are going to be slimmer than keeping it out of the other 8 county parks. So that's actually very good news for your county. There we go. Back the wrong way. So in order to protect yourself and know what you're doing in protecting your environment, you need to know what the pipeline infrastructure is all about. The drilling pads typically are 3+ acres, but with the onset of putting more than one well on a well pad, those numbers can be higher. But if you look at the infrastructure, when you're talking about the roads that are needed to put the wells into the ground, and the infrastructure that's needed to bring the water up there and the pipeline infrastructure that's needed to take the fuel from the well site to the consumer, you're looking at about 5.7 acres, and that's a very low number. These are some photographs of well pads in the state of Pennsylvania. So to get a sense of what the impact of infrastructure is, you need to know the pipelines are not just pipelines. I'm going to real quick show you and go through these very quickly, and I'm happy to explain to anyone afterwards what the infrastructure entails and how that exponentially increases the impact to our environment, our air, and our water. So there's your well pad, which you know, and now there are about 12 wells per pad. These are the gathering lines, and the gathering lines right now in Pennsylvania are Class 1, which are mostly rural, so you're talking county parks and state parks, are unregulated. So the industry can put those pipelines anywhere they want to. They're not, there's no oversight for siting or safety. Some of those gathering lines are now the size of transportation lines. The transmission line now, they're up to about 60 inches. A lot of the gathering lines are in that 24 rather to 50 inch diameter classification. And then you need processing plants. And then you need the transmission lines. So the transmission lines are either interstate or intrastate, which is a whole other conversation, but it's important to know in how they're sited and what kind of power, what kind of ability a community has to influence where a transmission line might or might not go. These photographs are pretty good indications of the size of the environmental impact from just one pipeline. I don't know if you can see, but that's a massive piece of equipment in the very background of that lower picture. Again, the transmission line can be now up to 60 inches. I've got some data there that we can discuss if anyone's interested in some of the factors that go into the impact, the environmental impact and the community impact, the air impact and the water impact of transmission lines. One of the most interesting and perhaps pertinent is the fact that the Marcellus Shale pipelines operate at a much higher PSI than the existing. You see we have the existing gas is at 125 PSI. Marcellus Shale can go up to 1,000 PSI, which means if there's an incident, if there's an accident, if there's a problem, more land, more people are going to be impacted. It's a larger impact radius.
What's PSI?
PSI. Thank you. Yeah, I always like to hear what the audience has to say on PSI. That's per square inch, yeah. So, and then you've got the compressor stations, and they can be massive, depending on how many lines go into that compressor station. The acreage that's involved in a compressor station location is significant. A lot of VOCs from there. There's your air quality. A lot of water. A lot of fuel is being burned in these compressor stations. Compressor stations ramp back up the PSI. So because as the fuel moves, it slows down, it goes to a compressor station, ramps back up to the state where it can move again. And these things are about every 50 miles. Every 50 miles. They're not mapped anywhere. that is accessible to the public. But imagine every 50 miles you have a compressor station. The photo on the left is a photo of the Columbia explosion in West Virginia. But I think a very good benchmark is for people to think of Aaron Brockovich. The movie Aaron Brockovich, that was about compressor stations. And then you've got the other pipeline infrastructure. So we're not just talking about a pipe that runs from a gas well to a house or a hospital or a business. You've got valves, you've got smart pigs that inspect for corrosion. Those smart pigs are above and beyond the valve locations. You've got to have a place to launch those things. Depending on the diameter of the pipe, the site for the launcher is going to be proportionate to the size of the pipe. Those photographs give you an idea. The fellow down at the bottom is a pretty burly guy. And just to, these are the photographs that we're used to seeing when it comes to Marcellus Shale drilling. But these are the things that you need to consider. That's the infrastructure. This is Allegheny, and this was in 2010. Right-of-ways. The pipelines require right-of-ways. And a temporary, I have said this for years, a temporary right-of-way is a right-of-way to the industry that is only used while they're constructing the pipeline. And then you get it back again. You can't tell a 200-year-old tree that it's temporary. And any infrastructure that goes into our state forest is going to require temporary and permanent right-of-ways. Those permanent right-of-ways begin at 150 feet beyond the pipeline. So that's another impact too that you need to consider when you're talking about our state forests and our county parks. This is what happened out in Wyoming.
Oh.
And we don't want to see that happen here. I like that better. Thank you.
Thank you. I had the privilege of watching some video of a compressor station. I would ask, I don't know if we have any hunters in the room that have night cameras, night goggles. But it's fascinating because during the day when you see a compressor station, I pass one on the turnpike when I go to Harrisburg every week. The sun's out, you really don't see anything emanating from the compressor station. It is amazing what happens at nighttime and see how many gaseous fumes emanate from that compressor station, from pipes, from various parts of the components. It's really dramatic. I'm serious. It's visually dramatic, and all of that is noxious material. So it's just something for you to think about. At this time, I'd like to bring Erica Staff from. She's a clean water advocate from Penn Environment, and they've been very active with me on the statewide moratorium initiative. Erica.
Thank you. I'm just going to stay here.
Yeah, you might have to turn the microphone on.
Well, good evening. My name is Erica Staff. I do work for Penn Environment here in Allegheny County. I live and work in Pittsburgh, and I regularly enjoy all of the parks and open spaces that our county has to offer. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, so I'm just going to speak to you tonight. This evening, I'd like to take a few minutes to present what I've learned through my own research in the last 5 years and the research of others to shed light on some facts that I believe are being overlooked in the discussion of whether to drill on, around, and under our county parks. Penn Environment has serious concerns about the proposal to drill Allegheny County parks. And we're concerned because we see the troubling track record of shale gas extraction in Pennsylvania so far. Fracking has contaminated drinking water. It's a fact that Pennsylvania state regulators identified 161 instances in which drinking water wells in Pennsylvania were impacted by drilling operations between 2008 and 2012. 1 in 6 investigations during that time frame found that oil and gas activity disrupted water supplies either temporarily or seriously enough to require replacement of that water source. The proximity of drinking water wells to fracking wells also increases the risk of contamination of residential wells with methane in Pennsylvania. And a study that was done by Duke University researchers pointed to faulty well casing as a likely source. So in that Duke University study, they specifically found wells in northeastern Pennsylvania within a kilometer of high-volume hydraulic fracturing, or fracking, showed methane concentration 6 times greater on average than the wells further away. In a separate report by physicians, scientists, and engineers for healthy energy, which is Tony and Graffia's group, he's going to be here later in November in Butler County. I encourage you to pick up a flyer, which we'll have available afterwards, and attend that event to learn more. His group found that data from fracking wells show a 6 to 7% well failure rate from faulty well integrity. Industry zone data shows that within 15 years, there's a likelihood of a 50% failure rate of wells. Fracking also endangers public health with air pollution. Air pollution from fracking threatens the health of people living and working nearby, as well as those far away. People living close to fracking sites are exposed to a variety of air pollutants, including volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, such as benzene, xylene, and toluene. And these chemicals cause a wide range of health problems, from eye irritation to headaches to asthma and cancer. Residents living near fracking sites have suffered a wide range of acute and chronic health problems. Just one homeowner from Greene County, as an example, describes how she and her children began to suffer nosebleeds, dizziness, vomiting, and vertigo, and to the point where she needed to be taken to the emergency room. This is after a compressor station, which Linda was talking about, the Aaron Brockovich type of situation, was built about 700 feet from her house. When she finally convinced state officials to test air quality near her home, that testing revealed benzene, styrene, toluene, xylene, hexane, heptane, acetone, carbon tetrachloride, and chloramethane in the air. What's more, all indicators are that stories like these are really just scratch the surface. In cases where families are made sick by fracking, where they have sought to hold drilling companies accountable in court, the companies have regularly insisted on gag orders as conditions to legal settlements. So people really are not getting their stories out there. Fracking also produces a variety of pollutants that contribute to regional air pollution problems. VOCs and nitrogen oxides and gas formations contribute to the formation of ozone smog, which can reduce lung function among healthy people and can trigger asthma attacks, and has been linked to increases in school absences, hospital visits, and premature death. Allegheny County, as many of you know, this year received an F from the American Lung Association for the number of high ozone days. We should not be exacerbating this problem. As you heard already, this fracking can damage our natural heritage. Fracking transforms rural and natural areas into industrial zones, and this development threatens parks and forests, damages the integrity of landscapes and habitats, and contributes to water pollution problems that threaten ecosystems. A study by the Nature Conservancy, as you heard, in Pennsylvania found that well pads average 3.1 acres, but related infrastructure damages an additional 5.7 acres of land, for a total of nearly 9 acres on average for every well pad. There are also costs that are imposed on communities. We've heard of some of them. As with prior extracted booms, the fracking oil and gas rush, so here in Pennsylvania it's a gas rush, in other states it can be an oil rush, but here in Pennsylvania it's a gas rush. This rush can disrupt local communities and impose a wide range of immediate and long-term costs on taxpayers. The trucks required to deliver water to a single fracking well can cause as much damage to roads as 3.5 million car journeys. That's according to testimony from our own Pennsylvania Department of Transportation representative. And that puts massive stress on roadways and bridges not constructed to handle such volumes of heavy traffic. Pennsylvania estimates that repairing roads affected by Marcellus shale drilling would cost $265 million. And after drilling has ended, there might be even greater economic costs. Headwater Economics found that counties in the western United States that have relied primarily on fossil fuel extraction are doing worse economically than their peers, with less diversified economies, a less educated workforce, and greater disparities in income once fossil fuel extraction ends. Gas development also harms public safety by increasing traffic in areas where roads are not designed for such high volumes. A 2011 survey by State Impact Pennsylvania found in 8 counties that 911 calls had increased in 7 of them, and with the number of calls increasing in one county 49% over 3 years, largely due to an increase in incidents involving heavy trucks. At this point in Pennsylvania, there have been more than 7,000 fracking wells drilled and more than 4,000 violations of our state's environmental laws. As for the track record in county parks, we can look to our neighbors in Washington County, where Cross Creek County Park has included at least one major spill, a clear-cutting error in an area specifically off-limits, a violation of the park's lease, a fish kill in a tributary of Cross Creek Lake, and an on-site burial of drill cuttings that violated the original lease. All of this was done by Range Resources, the company most likely to drill here in Allegheny County parks, if drilling is allowed at all. So while some individuals will choose to lease their gas rights for fracking, many are choosing to keep it out of and away from their backyards. Our parks are everyone's backyards. They belong to us all, and I would hope that our county officials would support protecting and preserving our precious open spaces long into the future to enjoy by all, rather than exploiting them for what will inevitably be short-term economic gain. So again, I sincerely want to thank Senator Ferlo for planning this town hall forum and this evening and providing the public an opportunity to learn more and learn how to take action on this issue. Thanks.
Thank you, Erica. I just want to remind quickly, folks, that thanks to our good former Vice President Dick Cheney, people may not be aware that some 6 federal laws of Marshall Industries exempt from various federal laws like the Clean Air Act and the Clean Streams Act. They're explicitly provided with an exemption under those laws. And the Republican majority, along with a couple of the Democrats in the House and the Senate and the governor, certainly when they passed the Oil and Gas Act, they ran roughshod over the local zoning powers. 100 years of local zoning has been sacrosanct, where local communities do their zoning and planning and land use policy has the right to dictate, where and what types of activities should be present in the municipality. That was stripped out in Act 13. Fortunately, that's before the High Court, and I have amendments that will correct that. But I'm just giving you a profile of a broader group of issues that we need to think about. I want to welcome Dr. Cynthia Walter here today, Associate Professor of Biology from St.
Hi, I'm here today representing the Westmoreland Marcellus Citizens Group. I'm a teacher and researcher who's been working on water quality for over 30 years. So I'd like to present some evidence today about how the park activity of fracking near and under it could impact both the air quality and the water quality. We've heard some of the same information in many ways from the other speakers, but I'll show you some of the peer-reviewed, published research that's behind a lot of their statements, and here are some of the more specifics. So you've been hearing that this hydraulic fracturing is not your conventional gas well system. And if any of you have any more questions about that, we'll be happy to answer those after the speakers. What I want to move on today is to say how the park fracking in that area could affect the air quality and then the water quality. Specifically, let's look at air. Air is needed, of course, for any recreation, but just to breathe on an average day, clean air is needed for 50% of the residents of Allegheny County. If you look at the health conditions of those folks, you have hundreds of thousands of people in this area who have cardiovascular disease, asthma, diabetes, emphysema, and other respiratory problems. Just breathing, having a normal day, they need clean air. And we've seen that the air quality is definitely impacted on when Marcellus Shale comes to town. Now, as we saw before, we already heard about the F air quality rating. It's not just in Allegheny County, it's in the surrounding counties as well. And we see it's a poor air quality rating for both ozone, something you can't smell or see, and then other little tiny things called these small particles that are only 2.5 microns, and they get deep into your lungs and they stay there for years and cause impacts. So this area is already seriously impaired in terms of its air. Marcellus Shale definitely causes further impairment to those conditions. What we see is, how does this happen? Well, it happens because you get fumes coming off of the wells themselves, but it also happens out of those compressors. And here's what is so hidden about this particular industry. It's not like our more familiar coal industry where we could see the pollution. You can't see this pollution. Here's what our eyes see, and there's what our actual lungs are breathing if we were to understand that from a more visual perspective using special cameras. Okay, so we see all these different chemicals come out of the system, and when they especially impair and interact with children, they have a tremendous metabolic rate. And so children would definitely be told on many days in this area not to go and do any recreational activities in the park or at home or at school or whatever. So we're looking at a real change in people's lives for a significant period of time. Now, water. Let's look at the water situation. Well, our water, again, sorry to say, it's already impaired. We've had years of industry impacts coming from the water. And if you look at that map there, you'll see that the chemicals and sediments that are coming from many industries are coming in through the Allegheny River into our water intake places and in our drinking water intakes noted in blue there. And we see Deer Lakes Park is only a couple miles uphill from the Allegheny River. So again, fracking around the park is just going to be one more risk and one more source of water pollution to this already stressed system. We also see some evidence from other local areas that are coming from the east that actually scientists and peer-reviewed studies have documented water pollution from Marcellus activities coming into feeder streams that come into the Allegheny. And then we just heard the story of the Warren case of the indictment and so on. So we have a lot of evidence to say that our water quality needs more protection, not less protection. Now, how does this water affect us even down at the tap level? Well, here's how hidden it is. Here's a thing called bromide, which comes out of fracking primarily. And when you mix the normal organics that are part of our water system and the normal chlorine that you have to keep the bacteria out of your household water, and you mix that together with this new substance, this bromide, you get this whole new class of hundreds of different kinds of chemicals called trihalomethanes. And we don't even have the ability to test for these things in the large diversity that they occur. And so we see that they can occur in higher amounts, and we're really in trouble. Finishing up, we have water pollution problems that can come from above. We have water pollution problems that can come from below. We have a very complicated geology. And many of the engineers coming here from Texas and Oklahoma don't understand Pennsylvania. And they really don't understand the amount of harm that could come both from below and above. And finishing up here, okay, we realize that as Senator Ferlo has mentioned, this shale gas is only a temporary source of income. Every one of these wells drops dramatically in its production rate and the amount of money that you're getting out of it. So they may promise a lot of money, but whether they'll actually deliver any of that money is yet to be seen. And furthermore, even if we look at the amount of money that has been delivered versus the kind of income that we already have in this state through more sustainable, healthy sources of income, we see that Marcellus Shale is nothing. It's not that important. And it will be going primarily overseas. That little tiny thin red line is the only amount that's going to actually stay perhaps in Pennsylvania for a few years. When we compare that to the capacity that we have for renewable energy industries, home-built, right here in Pennsylvania, I think we have a really vibrant economy that will be more sustainable in the long run. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Walter.
Great. I also want to thank each and every one of you for coming here tonight. You're doing what citizens in a republic are supposed to be doing, and that is participate. And I hope that you all remember our 5th grade civics lessons in knowing that it's you that makes the policy, not the quote-unquote people in Harrisburg or Washington, D.C. You make the policy. This is your choice, your decision. And it is disconcerting to me in oh so many ways as to how our government and our institutions of government have failed us miserably in informing us as to what this is. In 2003, we were informed that we were sitting on top of the second largest gas plant in the world. I, like many others, thought, great, jobs, money, sounds good. And we on City Council didn't think much about it until about 2008, 2009, when constituents were calling us to complain about the fact that in places like Morningside, Lawrenceville, Lincoln Place, and other places in the city, that people were going, knocking on the door and offering a $1,200 check and a standard lease, whatever that is. There is no such thing, by the way, and wanting to lease small parcels of land, right? 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 square feet of land, which is negligible at best when you're talking about drilling and what the scale of what you need. Prior to working in council for 20 years, I was also a litigation paralegal. I worked at a law firm, Babs Callan and Reed Smith, worked for clients, and in my last 4 years, I specialized in regulation in environmental law, and one of our clients was a major gas driller in Allegheny National Forest. I do not come to this with, you know, oh my God, I'm a tree hugger and all that stuff. I have practical knowledge, practical experience in the regulatory background, and before coming on to council. What troubled me most was this. When we started to begin to kind of come to grips with this in the council, 9 people charged with looking to the health, the welfare, and the safety of the citizens. That's the oath that we take, along with abiding by the Constitution. We found no health risk assessments to confer with. We found no information at all coming from the state to us, no notice, no anything. Like, hey, guess what, we're going to get drilled. You guys might want to think about that. What do you think? No interplay, even on an intergovernmental level. We started to hear things about health, air, and water quality denigration. We heard about places like Dimmitt, Pennsylvania, where a bad well casing poisoned the aquifer and the wells of the families were destroyed. We started to hear from places in Washington County that had similar problems. And you probably heard about the Hallowich case, and I can tell you about 20 others like it, where families essentially had to pack up and leave, sign confidentiality agreements, get a settlement of that from the industry. We have plenty of people here with scientific backgrounds about gas pipelines, which nobody seems to really understand at all, because we're all focused on the drilling. The pipeline situations is almost as scary as the drilling because of the lack of notice to local officials. Every step of the way, that if you go check any law, when a permit is issued, when anything is being done with Marcellus drilling or Utica underneath that, there is no notice by law to local officials. That's the closest point of contact you have as a citizen to your government. None. I attended a number of courses, about 3 of them at Local Government Academy last year on managing Marcellus for local officials, and it became apparent every step of the way. The state Pennsylvania Emergency Management does not have a protocol on significant events, i.e. blowouts, well fires, compressor station blowups. There is none. How many people here are volunteer firefighters? Anybody in the room, or for volunteer first responders? I ask that question because you should go back and ask your municipal government and your volunteer fire companies if they have been trained to deal with well fires. Because the city of Pittsburgh wasn't. And those are the reasons that we went down that punch list of questions that we asked. Whether it's a development coming into the city or anything else, the measuring stick is the public safety first. And when we found nothing at all, that accounts for these things, and yet 200 acres in my council district was leased, Catholic Cemetery, Calvary, and other places in Lincoln Place were leased. And I was being courted to fly down to Fort Worth, Texas, say, oh, well, urban drilling goes by the industry. And I declined the bride, and I made some calls and found out. But, you know, here we are now, and I'll finish with this. If we were in a court of law, and someone was on trial for murder, or some other heinous crime, the evidence would have been sufficient probably 3 years ago. And here we are today, 3 years on, and yet the evidence keeps piling up. We have a radioactive creek in Indiana County, and we have a radioactive creek now in Warren, PA. Radium. That's real. This is not something we want to expose ourselves to. We have well casing failure. That's the cement lining outside the tube that brings the gas up. 7% of all new wells are leaking in Pennsylvania. That is borne out by PA DEP statistics, and they leak more over time. Guess how long a cement casing has to last on a well pipe? Forever. Because if it doesn't, then the aquifer can be contaminated, the source of a lot of drinking water, and I would also say that a lot of people in the northeast part of the county have well water. And if you think that non-city water is safe, well, guess where this water is going? Into the Allegheny River, which is the drinking water source for quote-unquote city water people. And if we have radium in the water, we don't have the means to get it out. You saw the slide about the barium in the river, that is a heavy salt. And when bromide, sorry. When bromides mix with chlorine, they create trihalomethanes, which are carcinogens directly linked with bladder cancer. Now think about where you're putting your drinking water. It's going right through your bladder. These are facts. These are real things. And yet I hear utter silence from my state representatives, but for a few, and my state senators, but for a few. Thank you, Mr. Ferlo. And it is up to us now to begin to engage with our representatives. They're not our rulers, they're our representatives, to begin to do their job. It is not good enough to say, oh, this is all a bunch of bunk. And there's an old saying, once you reach the limits of your logical argument, you resort to name calling. And I hear a lot of name calling going on in this, what I hope would be a discussion in our state, and it has turned into an argument. So with that said, we'll turn it back over to Jim, and I need you to think about this from a governmental point of view, and your job as a citizen to begin to think and act. And I also want you to engage with people. If you want more information with Save Our Parks, it's an organization. You can get there and contact them through marcellusprotest.org if you want to write them. That down, marcellusprotest.org are links to how to get organized, how to get good information to your community, and we'll come out and talk to you as well. And also, if you have HBO, dial up Gasland and invite your friends and neighbor and your family over and sit down and watch that, and then have a discussion and then begin to educate yourself. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Doug. Again, I want to thank Protect Our Parks Ad Hoc Coalition for co-sponsoring the meeting tonight. A great group of people who are very dedicated to the issues that we've enumerated. Just on a personal note, you know, I grew up in a low-income neighborhood, working class, right next to copper mill that makes your revered copper and brass in upstate New York. I come from a family of 12, 9 brothers and sisters. 3 of my older siblings are deceased, all from cancer. 1 kidney, 1 brain, 1 throat. Now, they were not directly from Marcellus Shale, but they were directly from my brother Frankie. Kept his head in the test tubes. He was a TV repairman in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. So every day he's working behind those test tubes. Remember, there's no such thing as EMF waves and all that. I have another brother that died of throat cancer. Worked for a long time as a paratrooper in the military. Worked with asbestos and other kinds of materials in the military. And my younger sister, kidney failure. She went to a wedding in September, and in a matter of 3 months she was deceased with the loss of a kidney, and spent the last days of her life with her. And I guess I'm making the point that, you know, have we not learned about the issue of our biodiversity, and the folks who call any of us tree huggers or laugh at the work of Rachel Carson. I mean, I don't know how much more evidence we have to show that we're all interconnected to the biodiversity around us. And it just pains me that we're about to launch. I've spent 25 years remediating environmental sites. I've taken 7 abandoned gas stations and built libraries and eco centers. I've had to clean up, have to install a steel mill. We now have an opportunity for a food company that wants to build a new building there. It was an abandoned steel mill. I could go on and on. Have we learned nothing from the last 50 years of industrial capitalism, that for us to build a different paradigm and demand a different level of sensibilities from our elected officials? So I hope that you will join us today in being part of this movement to right the wrong that's about to unfold, whether it's at the county council level or whether it's with state government. And with that, I want to open up for any questions and answers or comments. I do want to